afternoon. We will get started with our Des Moines Waterworks Board of Trustees meeting. It's May 22nd. It's 3:30 and we're in the boardroom. So our first item up is our consent agenda. Bill, I think you wanted to pull
I
something
do.
from us?
If you would, if you pull item 1C, the list of payments, I have a particular payment that I'd highlight there. Otherwise, items A through E, I would recommend your passage.
Looking for a motion to approve the consent agenda with the exception with the pull of 3C.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
And Bill, your item?
The item that I'd point to the board before you approve the list of payments is a payment of $107.31 to me. As per my norm, the finance director or the chief financial officer and I often have a discussion on a number of items within the payment registers that you approve each month, but this one came out of my attention because it's a payment that's already been made to me of $107.31. Before you approve it, I just want you to be aware that there is a payment to me in the long list, 12 or 11 pages of payments that you're about to approve.
So that's halfway down on page 1 for your reference. Thank you for pointing that out. With that explanation, I'll be looking for a motion to approve.
So moved.
Second.
Second.
All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? None? Okay. Moving ahead, we have item 3A. Let me first say, I'm sorry, I don't see any members of the public here, but this is the time that we welcome public members to make a comment before the board, either for something on the agenda or any matter that they would like to bring to our attention. Okay, seeing none, now we'll move to 3A.
If I may, Sue, this is a pretty standard acceptance of a already completed improvement here at the Fluor Drive plant. The original contract was for about $593,000, actually for $593,000. We are asking your acceptance of a total contract of $620,726. This was in fact a project that was completed successfully. We approved change orders of some $27,000 involving a number of different plumbing improvements and a augmented eye wash station here for the safety of our employees. So we ask your approval to move forward, accepting this with releasing retainage and moving forward to Brocon services of $620,726.
Looking for a motion to accept the 2017 Fluor Drive Water Treatment Plant Chloride Storage Improvement Project completed by Broken Services LLC in the amount of $620,726.
So moved.
Second.
Okay. Any discussion? Okay. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Great. 3B, Bill.
This is a request for a single change order approval of about $128,000. But you'll note that prior to the request here to you as board to approve $128,000, I have approved 5 previous change orders for a total of 80. I'm sorry, I'm missing my total here at the moment. Dan, do you have it in front of you by any chance? 73,000.
Yeah,
Yes.
it's about.
Yes, I'm seeing it on the
It's
sheet.
about 80, I think.
$80,000, well within my authority, but now we have a situation where we're adding an additional $128,000. This project, maybe I should step back for a minute. This is the project that will take our wastewater, processing wastewater from removing of nitrate when our facilities, our nitrate removal facilities, our ionization facilities are operating, and instead of, as we've historically discharging them into the Raccoon River, now taking it up, actually up Martin Luther King Parkway to an area near High Street, go into the sanitary sewer and then be transported to the wastewater reclamation facility for treatment. the $128,000 more or less change order that I'm asking your approval for here involves so-called change of site condition issues. This project has been burdened by a number of unforeseen issues associated with railroad crossing, river crossing, and then essentially going up the city right-of-way to High Street off MLK. These, each and every one of the line items and change orders 1 through 5 have been negotiated by our engineering staff. Dan has been very much involved in it, but they involve essentially really three categories of issues: railroad crossing related issues. We had a situation where we mislocated our facilities around the entry point into the sanitary sewer, and then we have a number of underground site conditions that can't reasonably be anticipated by either the contractor, their subcontractors, or ourselves, and we are essentially reimbursing the contractor, the subcontractor, for their costs associated with that. A long way of saying a staff recommendation here is a $128,000 change order in the context of another $80,000 that have already been paid for this, what was assumed to be about a $1.34 million project that will now essentially be $200,000 more than that. Happy to answer any questions you may have on it. We're hoping that this project will be completed, permitted, and operating late summer or early fall. And at a time, we hope, we're not using the denitrification facilities. Happy to answer any questions you may have.
I'm looking for a motion to authorize the CEO and general manager to execute change order number 6 to the nitrate removal facility process residuals force main contract in the amount of $127,290.88.
So moved.
And a second?
Second.
Okay, any other discussion? Questions for Bill? All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
And opposed? Great. Moving ahead, 3C.
Item 3C is requesting our ability to solicit bids for your consideration at the June meeting involving a project you're very familiar with. I think we've confused, certainly perhaps only me, about titling. We once upon a time called this the Southwest Project. Now it's the Northwest Warren County Project, which is an interesting choice of locations. But at the end of the day, this is a project that you are aware of, fully financed by West Des Moines, Cumming, and Norwalk, involving taking water from our Maffitt treatment facility and moving it to the interstate, beneath the interstate, and then providing an alternative source of water for both the city of Cumming and the city of Norwalk. An important project for us, again, fully funded by entities other than Des Moines Waterworks. These are actually the 3rd and 4th phases. This is the area on Adams Street where a pump station and force main will exist now. We're going underneath I-35 and taking a water main towards the city of Norwalk. The engineering estimate here is about $1.9 million, actually $1.87 million. For the project, about $5 million. Happy to answer any questions you may have on it, but we're asking your permission to solicit bids for your consideration your next board meeting.
So I'm looking for a motion to authorize staff to solicit bids for the Northwest Warren County feeder main and establish the date of the public hearing as the date of the June 2018 board meeting, and direct staff to publish notice as provided by law. Do we have a motion?
So moved.
In a second?
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Moving ahead to 3D.
And if I may, this is one in which board member Graham Gillette has indicated a conflict. Obviously, he's not here today, but I did want to read a brief statement that will be included in the record and try to answer any questions you may have. Board member Graham Gillette has advised both myself And our legal counsel that he has a conflict of interest with respect to this item due to family and financial connections to Graham Construction and the Graham Group. Mr. Gillette has taken no part in the dealings related to this item. Mr. Gillette has advised me that he would have abstained from participation in voting if he were present. Let me explain what is a relatively
It goes back and forth between Hill Brothers, and then there was another one that bid it off, and Grimes, it's one of the first times that Grimes got it. And, was last year, and Spec is new to the list, I think. I don't remember Spec ever having gotten it.
Never gotten it, I don't know if they've bid before.
Yeah, so we kinda have a new one in the list this year, which is a good thing. Hills Brothers has bid it for a long time.
While we're on it, Dan, based on your experience, given the difference in bids, 187 versus 213, I'm assuming that that's a narrow band.
That's pretty tight, particularly when last year's was 302, and if I remember right, Ted and Jen, I think 302 was huge last year. It went really up from the previous year. So now we're seeing it go back down to a more reasonable number.
I'm certainly and pleasantly surprised when our 2018 numbers are less than our 2017 and something involving a petroleum product as asphalt is. So I think I would be disingenuous if I didn't tell you that I think this is a good situation with an appropriate number of bidders and presumably a good price.
Any other discussion? All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Item 3F.
Similar in many ways. Now we're talking about concrete as opposed to asphaltic concrete or Portland concrete cement, to be more precise, in item 3F. Diane, you probably would not have been around for a discussion about it. The other board members may be familiar with the idea that on smaller work that we're involved in, we partner with the city of Des Moines and give them a particular price that's far less than we would get on the open market generally. The pricing here that you have for the $225,000 staff recommendation is for 4 cubic yards or larger restorations. But this is a situation, instead of 2, now we see 4. I think for the most part, yeah, we probably have experience with all 4 of these. CTI in a narrow band again is the presumptive staff recommendation to move forward with the concrete patching contract for this season at $225,000. Happy to answer any questions you might have.
So we're seeking a motion to award the 2018-2019 concrete contract to CTI Ready Mix in the amount of $225,150. Do we have a motion?
So moved.
Second.
And a second. Any other discussion? All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
And opposed? 3G.
3G is a little different than the concrete and asphaltic patching contracts you saw just before these, but you'll remember in several presentations that Dan and others have provided you over the years. We have a cathodic protection program that involves shared work between ourselves and contractors that essentially involves anode bags being installed at the pipe surface. One of the tasks that's very helpful is to remove the excavated material, hydroclean and Badger daylighting, use Vector-related types of services to be able to do that. We don't have the capability of doing it. You see here 2 pricing responses for our request, and also note the number of excavations we're talking about: 151 street X's, sidewalk, 31 sidewalk X's, and 250 parking excavations. So a lot of work going on here through a subcontractor. Hydroclean is somebody that we work with on a regular basis in a number of different ways, usually with sewer or cleaning related conveyance issues, but certainly very confident in their ability to do this work at the staff recommended $84,385 amount.
So we're seeking a motion to award core drilling services for the 2018 anode retrofit program to the low responsible bidder, HydroClean, in the amount of $84,385. Do we have a motion?
So moved.
In a second.
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Item 3H.
If I may, this is a topic that we've had some discussion at the customer relations subcommittee level, but this essentially is taking the action that you approved as a board last month. That's approving a phase 2 contract with FCS for $200,000, expanding that contract by about $60,000 with those services, the $60,000 services being focused on providing assistance to Ted, Dale, and Diane, who are moving forward with a technical group very similar to the circuit group, although we're still getting some communications from varying committees on who they want sitting on that. But that group in particular will be in charge with providing a number of data requests for FCS involving the costing out of regional water production here in phase 2. This essentially, again, amends the contract from $200,000 to $260,000. I remind the board, and it's in the materials in front of you, that even with this amendment, the 1/3 cost that Des Moines Waterworks is bearing for the FCS first and second phases as amended will be about $142,000. The other two communities, or two water utilities, Urbandale Water Utility and West Des Moines Waterworks, will provide the same amount of money, but reminding you also that there's been significant discussion that if this reaches final agreement with other communities besides the 3 water utilities on regionalization of water production, that they then would control, if not common, not unusual project, and that is a new development off our system. That is, that we don't have existing distribution system that would support an undeveloped area. This is an area off the northeast mixed master where there are a number of warehouse units being constructed by the Graham Group or one of their subsidiaries. Fire protection for those facilities are critical. So it's not unusual for us in facing that kind of circumstance to tell the developer that we would expect them to extend the fire protection system or the water main system, the distribution system, at their expense. They have agreed to do that. We do, as part of the old Southeast Polk system, have, is it Southeast Polk, Dan?
That's the original Polk County system.
The original Polk County system, sorry. The Polk County system, not the Southeast Polk system, have about 30 customers in the Norwoodville area, residential customers primarily, that are operating off a shared 2-inch main. As your experiences on this board will remind you, that is an awfully thin and inadequate long-term service proposition for 30 customers. As part of the Graham project, we have agreed, staff has agreed to pay $100,000 to Graham to have their contractor essentially do service connections to the new main. Again, this is not a project that would be in any way unusual or exceptional, and probably not one that I would be bringing to your attention, but for the fact that one of your peers, one of the trustees, is in fact an interested party. Again, he nor his family were anywhere involved in our discussions with the Graham Group, nor exerted any influence on our recommendation to you here. Happy to answer any questions you may have on this. Dan, if I missed anything from an operating or design standpoint, you
No,
want to add?
you haven't, but the one thing that would be very helpful for you to know is the $100,000 value was calculated from what the real cost is to do 33 water service transfers and to cap out the old 2-inch mains. So we got to that number in a meaningful scientific way, even though it's a nice round number. It's just basically what that dollar amount works out to be is almost exactly $100,000. So we agreed to pay them for the work that we would have to do if we were putting in a new water main to transfer the services, and that's how we got to the number.
And just to add a little bit of emphasis to that, obviously we think that there are both economies as well as customer effectiveness in having an existing contractor who's doing the work out there doing it, as opposed to separately contracted. Just makes sense. to have somebody who's already mobilized in the area do this work and to do it at a time that's concurrent with other construction going on out there, as opposed to now bidding in and going through this service line connection process in 6 months or next year, whatever it may be. This is essentially an improvement to our system at a relatively marginal cost.
So we're seeking a motion to authorize the CEO and general manager to reimburse Graham Warehouse for LP at $100,000 for water main installation for the Broadway project.
So moved.
In a second?
Second.
Any discussion?
Rick, anything that I should add? That I know you've been involved in discussions with Graham about his concerns about the appearance of impropriety here.
I don't think so, I think fully covered it.
Okay. Any other discussion? All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Item 3E.
Now we have a number of issues that are essentially moving us forward in our seasonal construction work. Items 3E and 3F are pretty interrelated. These involve patching contracts. The first situation in item 3E, we're talking about asphaltic concrete patching. You know, each year we go through a process with a disproportionate number of main breaks. In the winter season, we go through a process, our crews go through a process, Jennifer's crews go through a process of doing an immediate and emergency repair. But because of weather conditions and largely because of the availability of the material and the difficulty of, in winter conditions, doing permanent road repairs, there's a temporary process that then matures into a more permanent process as the weather improves. This is to go back and deal with those issues. First is the asphaltic concrete surface patch contract. Through the bidding process, we've come back with a recommendation here for Spec USA at about $187,000. Happy to answer any questions you may have on it, or Jennifer, I'm sure, would be happy to answer any questions.
So I'm seeking a motion to award the asphaltic concrete surface patch contract for 2018-2019 to Spec USA in the amount of $187,000. Do we have a motion?
So moved.
In a second?
Second.
Discussion.
I have a question. It talked about contractors who did not bid. Is it usual to just have 2 bids? Is this unusual?
I think it's unusually small. We normally would have more than a couple. Grimes, who had the contract last year, didn't bid. Diane, in my experience, there's a business issue there, and there may be a lack of margin issue there. They may have lost money in the last contract. Who knows? But you know, clearly, as board members, there has to be some solace when you've got at least 2 bidders and they're relatively close and close to our estimate. This pricing actually is beneath what I would have expected, and I think we would have expected looking at the 2017 numbers. But nonetheless, we certainly would prefer more than 2, but I think 2 provides you at least some sense of competition. Anything you want to add on that, Jen?
I thought it.
Dan, from an engineering standpoint?
Been 2 for years.
Has it been just
Yeah,
you?
you,
A prorata portion of that, or an apportioned contribution for the entire fees, and we would recoup a significant amount of $142,000. Happy to answer any questions you may have on this. If I may, before you consider or discuss, I would like to point out that each of you, I think, received a communication from Graham Gillette, who again is unable to be here today. I would ask for your consideration that the record include a statement from Graham that if I were president, I would be voting no to approve the amended contract with FCS. Happy to answer any questions you may have after your motion to approve.
Before we take a motion, I just want to clarify one thing for the group. The $60,000, there was a recommendation made by the mayor of Ankeny to have some of the other suburban customers, Ankeny, Urbandale, Waukee, and Johnston, contribute toward this $60,000. However, in the customer relations meeting, it was clear that for those that were attending, we wanted to ensure that the contract was still with the 3 entities, being West Des Moines, Urbandale, and Des Moines. So there may in fact be an interest from, and I believe there is, in contributions in the amount of $10,000 from 4 of the entities that are interested in having this facilitation done, which would mean our part would not be a third. So I just wanted to point that out. There's a meeting tomorrow morning with the regional mayors, and we hope to finalize that. So I appreciate that this is written to be divided by 3 and that we would be the 3 signers, but we may in fact have additional contributions. We were not going to be going to the city of Des Moines, city of West Des Moines, or Urbandale, however, because we have 3 utilities, water utilities. So just want to clarify that. So with that, we'll be looking for a motion to approve and authorize the CEO, general manager, to amend the consulting services agreement with FCS Group for Regional Water Production Work Group Phase 2. We have a motion.
So moved.
Second,
Second.
discussion.
If I may, Sue, the statement you just made about other contributors, I mean, I think that's something that Peggy and I will want to talk with the group or you about to understand how that would work. The accounting becomes pretty difficult now if we have contributions that are really a setback from ultimately where those communities may land. We can work the detail. I just want to be clear in your discussions moving forward tomorrow that there's some complication associated with that. Again, what's before you is simply to move an amendment of the contract from $200,000 to $260,000 with the assumption that the 3 water utilities would bear the entire $260,000 cost in the short term.
In our March meeting, what we had on item 3D from the agenda, it says, in September 2017, the CEO and general manager executed an agreement with FCS Group for a total of $181,480. Basically, that we would divide it up between the 3 water facilities in Des Moines, West Des Moines, and Urbandale. Talking about a total of $50,000 at that point. In FCS facilitated a series of meetings. Then it talks about in January of 2018, FCS provided a report to the Des Moines Waterworks Board concerning its activities, including a, quote, draft memorandum of understanding concerning a proposed transfer of assets approach and restructuring of governance concerning regional water productions. This MOU is proved largely unaligned with the Des Moines Waterworks Board's views of regionalization, though perhaps a starting point for further detailed discussions on the financial impacts and governance effects on Des Moines Waterworks customers. We had a meeting on February 2nd where we did what it calls provided extensive edits and comments. And then FCS presented its work plan in March. Kind of going along if you'll recall when we talked about extending the money last time, Graham and I were largely concluding the same things about the money and where we seem to be headed, and that there's whether FCS is really if we're going to do asset valuation, which was the problem we had several years ago, and that we decided early on to focus on governance and trying to figure out a way to do this without asset transfer, which is certainly something we can do, and that was what we were supposed to do. And my recollection from the meetings, when we talked about it, maybe the 3rd or so meeting last fall, that people started talking about asset transfer. And exploring asset transfer and deciding that that's what we're going to do are 2 different things. And I agree with Graham that FCS wouldn't have been chosen if we had known we were going to do asset transfer. They were not the firm, and we had some other things, and we kind of did it in a little somewhat hurried fashion anyway, that we wanted to get this done and moving. There's a lawyer named Tucker from New York who once said that, no man's life, liberty, or property is safe when the legislature's in session. And that has provided some context to what we're doing here. It'd be much better and much easier for everyone involved. And what we talked about earlier, the lines in Norwalk and Cumming and West Des Moines and servicing that area. If the legislature had done its bill last year, we wouldn't have been able to do that for those people and provided the service. There's a whole bunch of stuff that happens when you just barge in and start pushing people around. This process can and should be orderly. I think if we're gonna look at asset valuation, I think FCS, I've got no real issues as a facilitation and trying to get the governance right and make sure that we have that part. I think they're not the firm for asset valuation. And it seems like we're giving up, citizens of this community have put in a lot over the years and collectively own Des Moines Water Works, and we're here to safeguard that for them and make sure that it stays a valuable asset, providing safe, clean drinking water. And the huge amount of resources we put into it over, the last century and a half should be valued. And some of the things seem to be aimed at just trying to get a deal done rather than making sure everybody's treated fairly in that process. Some of the pressures and stresses from outside seem to push us towards that. I think we could do this with, and we could open up the evaluation portion to somebody else to look at just to make sure we do it correctly. We're talking about, throwing more money every couple of months. I don't know. I felt hesitant last time, but I went along with it because it seemed necessary to do. But then we come back again in 2 months and ask for more money to change it. And that gives me a little unease of itself. So I want to oppose it for that reason, not because as I've talked about before, our main purpose was to try to find some kind of regional governance, which we've been moving towards. We had problems with asset evaluation. And then some of the same folks that balked at making an agreement several years ago said, no, we should explore asset valuation. And we're doing that, but we don't need to run headlong into it. Further, we made extensive changes to that MOU and suggested them, but I haven't seen that we've really come to an agreement on what our purpose is. A memorandum of understanding, we had suggestions from them, and we put in suggestions, but we haven't really had an agreement. And that makes me uneasy. We're saying we're gonna go forward, but we don't really know what we want. So I would oppose this for that purpose.
Yeah, I think there's a couple issues here from what I understand. It's not FCS coming back and seeking, it's this technical committee that says we need the assistance here. So that's one issue, but then the second one is whether or not they're the people to do it, and I don't know what the answer is to that. I understand they're on an expedited schedule to get this done by August. I get concerned that if we're gonna let another bid now and bring somebody new in, that it's not gonna be able to do it for this amount of money and get it done in that time but I'm not sure about all the questions that they're asking. I agree with you. I think we're still in the exploring asset transfer stage, so getting some of that information to look at. I know we have talked about putting some other options on the table, and I think it's time that we got down to doing that and getting some specifics so people can look at it, and maybe it's in lieu of this, or maybe it's something that could be folded into this. I don't know. I would be interested too where the MOU process is, since they went through all of that and took all those comments. So But I think a decision's been made to do the exploration. To me, it sounds like this is a piece that's been requested by that group that came together for technical purposes, that they have that assistance. That assistance wasn't part of the previous contract, as I understand it. And so I guess I will be voting yes to go ahead so that we can stay on schedule. And I guess this group feels comfortable. Sue, you know more about this than I do with FCS, so I don't know a lot about them.
They are, and I do want to address the MOU because I think you'll remember when we went through that as a board, we set aside item number 6, and that was basically what is the asset worth. So it was partially us setting that aside and saying until we know what the asset is worth, we can't go any further on the MOU. So this was, I mean, I really see phase 2 as addressing the issue that we brought up on the MOU, saying what is the asset worth, we can't go any further. Also, many of the items in the MOU, we are hoping, and I'll look to Ted, can be addressed or worked out through the technical committee. One example is the operating agreement. I don't know that you want the 6 mayors and the 3 waterworks chairs coming up with what that right term is. But if we could look to the technical committee and say, what would be the right amount of time so that the workers feel valued and so that they feel like they're still part of it. And then if we can bring those suggestions back from the technical committee, I think we will fill in many of the pieces for the MOU. I would hope. I know Ted and his group are looking to what other things can we have the technical group address. Ted, I know you've had a meeting. Do you want to talk about any of this?
I'd be happy to.
Sure.
Kind of give you an update if you'd like.
That'd be great. I think that'd be helpful.
After the last work group meeting, I guess the large meeting, when it was shared that the working group decided to divide and conquer with a steering committee and then a technical financial committee, we met, the tri-chairs, if you will, Diana, Dale, and myself. We met at the end of April. At that time, we sort of focused our efforts on the information requests that had gone out to all the utilities, but then we also talked about what we might offer to the group and what we might cover as a technical financial committee. Since then, we've also reached out to Jason. We learned, I guess I will say, that part of the ask of FCS was that they help facilitate this discussion, this technical financial group discussion. We've reached out to Jason, we've talked to him, and we've asked him to give us a little guidance or direction on just what kind of things that this group should address. He's given us a couple of suggestions. He sent the 3 of us an email. Length of the proposed operating agreements is an example of something that he thought we should discuss and possibly give feedback to the steering committee, the board chairs and mayors, on what the range of logical, reasonable operating agreements could be. We talked about timing of asset inclusion, which has been sort of a hot topic at the working group meetings. Measuring reserve capacity, determining the amount of reserve capacity. And then just generally items in the MOU that were left unresolved, and there were many. How do we deal with things like lost water, service territories, new entrants into the region, a lot of things like that throughout the MOU. We have issued an invitation to each entity to appoint a member. We've asked them all to hold the afternoons of the 30th and 31st of this month. A potential meeting with Jason would actually come, and we'd have, I guess, a kickoff meeting and sort of start the ball rolling, talk more about what we're going to do, and that's kind of what we're going to do.
Okay, thank you, Dick. Does that help a little bit, Mark, to understand where the MOU is? And don't think we can go any further on that because of that Area 6 until we have an idea of the asset valuation.
Can I add a couple considerations, if I may? And I don't presume that it'll change votes on this issue, and certainly respect reservations about FCS and reservations about scope creep, a lot of things that I think are very much in play here. But at the risk of being too blunt, I mean, Mayor Anderwig, when he was acting as chair at the last series of discussions at the steering committee level, essentially said trying to bifurcate issues here, trying to send the technical financial to a group that is uniquely capable through their outreach into their organizations to answer the real focus of phase two. The focus of phase two is financial. It involves, you know, a number of issues, but it involves this idea not of valuing all the assets, because again, that's not what's going to happen here. This surplus or excess capacity issue essentially says that instead of evaluating all of our 110 million gallons of water produced in all the bricks and mortars at 3 facilities versus the AC Ward plant for West Des Moines or Polk City facility or Altoona, there's some accounting of how communities are using water and what is excess, if you will, for communities who have not contributed purchase capacity dollars into the process. So this is not phase two, and the outcome that I think you can reasonably expect from FCS is not like Black and Beach. Maybe it should be, and maybe that's your argument, but nonetheless, they're not going to value all the assets. That's not where this process is headed. Also, if you were to vote today to reject the staff recommendation here to add $60,000 to channelize more of the detail here to the technical group, then you're essentially going to be cutting off that bifurcation, putting more of that, frankly, to a forum that that is uniquely capable of dealing with governance issues, but I don't think is capable of dealing, frankly, with the financial, engineering, technical issues that are going to be critical to phase two. So again, I respect differences of opinion on this. I think to a person on this board, from my discussions with each of you, there are deep reservations about asset transfer and if that makes sense ultimately, but there's a lot of unknown data that, in my view, is best fleshed out by the technical committee that Ted is a tri-chair of. The governance issues are uniquely for electives, in my view, and board chairs. But if you really want to get to the scope of, and the spirit, I think, of phase two of this agreement, you really need to resource Jason to spend a great deal of time agenda managing and working through the technical group to be able to get to the real financial implications of putative regional water production.
Can I ask a question? Maybe it's a question for you, Ted. So you said that the people who are on that technical financial committee are uniquely qualified to do that. So my question is, you asked for assistance. What is that assistance? Is it in agenda development and directing the group and bringing in, you know, ways that other communities have done this, or options?
Can I try, Ted, just because you know, Ted and I have had a number of discussions, and frankly, we're working together to try and shape this in the most effective way. We're looking to Jason to largely agenda manage what issues should be in front of the technical financial group. And what makes it a little bit confusing, Diane, is there's a CERWIC, a Central Iowa Regional Water Group, existing technical group that's largely on the engineering side. Many of the issues that the phase two scope goes to are financial. Ted is not going to be able to talk about indebtedness issues and defeasement issues. Peggy is. So what we're trying to do is to reach out to interested communities and say, tell us who you think is going to be appropriate, and maybe double duty realistically, maybe both an engineering person and a financial person to attend these. But I believe we need to look to Jason to lead the agenda management of these technical groups and to work with the group itself on pulling from individual organizations like Polk City, like Des Moines, like Urbandale, like West Des Moines, and like Altoona, the existing producers, data that are part of their system. There was an extensive questionnaire sent out, as you know, easy for us to answer because we had a cost of service study, not so easy for the other communities who don't do cost of service analysis. So I hope that was responsive to your question. And Ted, if you want to add anything to that or correct me, go ahead.
No corrections. One thing I would add, in conversations with Jason about where this bifurcation, as Bill calls it, is going, the phase 2 process is very much a financial process. We've heard Mayor Gear say many times, this has to make sense for us, bottom line, or we're not going to do it. We've heard that many times, and that's, I think, the question that is really trying to be answered is from a bottom line financial perspective. But Jason, in discussions with him, has pointed out that once we get to that answer later this year, if the answer is yeah, it seems to make sense, there's going to be extreme interest in getting this MOU lined up and off the ground and having answers to those questions. What Sue shared with me was she'd really like, or she thinks the group would really like to have input from the technical folks about these questions and answers, so they can use that to answer the questions in the MOU and get it lined up very quickly. I think Jason is in a position to help us understand which items we should focus on and sort of facilitate that discussion and hopefully bring us to the middle, because we're right now not at the middle. We're kind of all over the place on many of these issues, and that's why they're outstanding. So I think he can guide us.
Great explanation.
Is that helpful to you on the agenda management issue? I, again, without oversimplifying, I think that the steering committee is uniquely qualified to handle a bundle of stuff, and they may be more along the MOU, more of the governance issue. The financial issues that need to be addressed here, I think we really need the assistance of Jason and his experience and FCS's experience to tease from the varying actors here a whole lot of data points.
And I think even as the steering committee is answering questions, we need Jason to be able to say, that's not a question I think you need to answer because we have technical working on it, and at least bringing a recommendation forward. So I really think he will be sharing information back and forth that needs to be shared. And I think that'd be a considerable amount of the work and reason that we wanted to expand it. So. Mark, any other questions? So we have a motion and a second. All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. And opposed?
Nay.
Thank you. Moving ahead, we have our committee reports, I believe.
We do.
Do the planning.
Yes.
The planning committee met Tuesday, May 1st. We had one item that was a surplus property consideration from Mr. Klein. It's some property to the north of the waterworks, just at the bottom of the hill, south of Grand. And the neighbors basically came in because of concerns. And Bill, do you want to explain it? And then I have a question after you finish.
Happy to, David. I mean, I think you hit on the long and short of it. It's an area that frankly is outside of our book of business. It's not an area that we view as being a productive contributor to our mission, nor is it part of the master plan. In terms of future considerations, it's an area that is prone towards some vagrancy, prone towards a lack of maintenance on our part. Doug Klein and his wife have expressed an interest in acquiring that property from us. We've begun an appraisal process about the market value of that, and I certainly have not seen the appraisal report because it hasn't been completed, but there will be little, if any, may have negative property value. I know, David, and that perhaps is where your question is going. There's some interest in trying to negotiate something other than a fee to transfer of property from Des Moines Waterworks to the Kleins. I'd suggest there's going to be some resistance from him and his counsel in doing that, and it may be a deal killer. But if that's where you wanted to ask, we can sure talk about that.
Yeah, I'd mentioned, it's gonna take a long time to do the sale, as I understand it. Or not huge, but it's fairly complicated, isn't it?
I mean, and Rick certainly can weigh in on it. I would assume this is a situation that can be dealt with this year.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
I guess
Do you have a concern about that?
No, it depends on what the value is per appraisal. I think Mr. Klein is not interested in a large purchase price, and this board has some legal constraints about donating property to a private individual. So the factual exploration needs to be completed before any judgments can be made about where this is going.
I'd mentioned to Bill some thoughts I had. And last night I was driving up the Fluor Bridge and I looked over at that area, and all along the river, between the tracks and the river, one of the homeless cabs were on fire. It was a big fire. And I imagine the neighbors, it looks like people are getting pushed up there more than before because of the clearing for the new construction. And I think the situation's gonna get worse, why they were here. And I just wondered if there was a possibility, if they wanted to do something, if the sale was gonna take a while, we could lease it. And then they could, right now, they can't do anything because it's not their property.
And again, we've had but preliminary discussions, and Ted's certainly been very much involved in this, as well as Rick. I think that through his legal counsel, Doug has made pretty clear that his interest is to have broad berth in how to manage that in the short term, and the lease simply will be inadequate to their
I just wondered
overall
if, to
interest.
get something happening fast, we could do a lease and then finish the sale later. I thought it was gonna take.
I don't think that, there may be other neighborhood concerns, David, and you rightly pointed us towards making sure the Owl's Head neighborhood, or whatever the appropriate neighborhood, is very much involved in the discussions as to disposition of this property, but I think the period of time to perfect this one way or another will be relatively short. I think that the client's interest from my discussions will be perhaps shortened significantly if it's only about leasing. They want complete control of the property, not for development purposes, and there's a number of things that you as a board can do to restrict that, at least in foreseeable future. They want to be able to put a significant amount of money into site clearing there.
No, we can put covenants on it to protect us, I think, but I just thought if it would speed it up, we could maybe do a temporary lease till the sale.
I appreciate that, and staff has a number of different pieces at our level now to complete and bring back to your overall, it'll take the full board consideration, obviously, to be able to make a decision here, but we'll report back on a periodic basis.
Okay, thank you. Customer Relations Committee, we covered the regionalization status, the proposal that was just brought forward. And then last week, was it Thursday night? Amy and Bill and I went out and presented before the City of Pleasant Hill. My thanks to Amy, she gave an excellent review historically of the relationship. And I think the City Council, it was one of their workshops, and they just wanted an idea of how they could be involved going forward in the whole discussion on regionalization as a total service customer of ours. So I think they were pleased to have us come. And again, Amy, if you have anything you want to add to it, you did a terrific job in presenting, and it's so clear that they have a great relationship with you. So thank you. Finance and audit.
And I'm sorry, can I just
Yes,
add one
sure.
little piece to that too? The fighting issue, I think, for at least some members of their city council is gonna be what is the total service relationship in this new world? Regional water production, I think that ultimately is what's on their mind.
Right.
And some recognition that in a world of considerations about board size, that they're probably too small to have direct representation, but a concern that there's a misbalance between the western suburbs and eastern Polk County interests. So that was kind of the long story, but I just wanted you as
Good.
board members to have a sense of that. How does total service work in this new world? We didn't have answers for it, but that was a major concern, as well as even if there's representation for some total service customers, they're probably not big enough to be represented, and how will their interests be borne out when we're hard pressed to name representatives from the eastern portion of the county that probably will serve on the new board if once agreed upon.
Moving ahead, then our Finance and Audit Committee, we had an excellent presentation on safety with it being such a priority for us. And I know that we are concerned, alarmed, if you will, at the number of injuries year to date. And so the awareness and recognition of the board, I think, is extremely important, that we express, as we did in the committee meeting, that we will do anything we can to ensure the safety of our employees, and we would be looking to the staff as to ideas and suggestions that would come forward. Bill, anything you want to add on that? It was a great presentation. So,
Nice job from Ted and his staff.
Mhm.
Thank you.
And with that, CEO comments? Do you want to?
May I just, the Botanical Garden,
Oh,
I think
sorry.
Mark and David may want to say something about that. I'm sorry,
I
the
don't
Foundation
know.
Board, I'm sorry, not the Botanical Garden. Graham's not here.
Yeah, well, we have our report on that. The two things I think people might want to know about are, A, we already talked about the eggs that were out in the
Yeah.
park. I have a theory. I made a video of a large duck rolling down the road last month. I think that the duck may have laid those eggs, I'm not sure. But it was a great success. It drew a whole lot of people into the park. It was amazing to see. We've got a new group that wants to participate in the Earth Day cleanup next year, and it got attention in a big way. Public art, it was kind of stuff that, like last year, we've had some public art issues that were not quite as successful, and this was really good, and we were really well received. The other thing, of course, we know we're kind of anticipating groundbreaking in June, I think, at Henkel, and staff were working on trying to get dates and things. I don't know if anybody's got any further thoughts on
Along
that.
those lines, just a reminder from Michelle to me coming into this meeting through work that Dan and she and others have been involved in. Henkel has executed all the documents, all the change orders, the complex change orders that go from 6.2 million to, 8.2 to 6.7 million, and all of the revisions and specs have all been completed. But I don't think we have a date yet, do we, Dan?
We're trying to set up a pre-construction meeting, and I think in that pre-construction meeting, it'll be in the next 5 or 6 days. Then that'll be one of the topics that we'll try to come up with some dates for
I don't have
that.
it for you yet, Mark. Okay.
Okay. Thank you, Mark. Any additional CEO comments?
Legislative update, Laura, do you have anything you want to talk about, even though we're pretty much done?
Yeah, we agreed, unlike the legislature that ran over, but they went home, so we're thankful for their service here in Des Moines, but they're back in their communities, running campaign re-elections. But I won't go into too much detail. My memo serves as an update onto certain issues that we were tracking and following. Our major success was that we are still intact as a water utility, so we can consider that a success. I just wanted to tell you moving forward that the staff and our contract lobbyists and Craig from Concordia will be monitoring the June 5th primaries, and then we'll be continuing to meet with those declared candidates. And Bill, I, Ted, and Craig have already met with a few, so they are coming to us. We had to knock a whole lot of doors to get those meetings. They're wanting to know the information before they run their campaigns. And also, thank you to board member Mark Wallace. He gave us a tip on the Drake University Strategic Political Communication class. They used us as their client this semester. It was their senior capstone project. And Craig and I went to their final presentation, and we have a 100-page book that they provided us with strategies, tactics, goals and objectives for the off-season advocacy, so June through December, before the January 2019 legislative session starts.
Nice.
So we have a lot of work to do based on what the Drake students want us to do. It's impressive, and some things can certainly be incorporated. Some things are things that we'll talk about later.
An example, though, of one recommendation that was made, and something that we certainly would be interested in your perspective on and would need to work through would be something akin to a town hall meeting in the off-season
Yep.
where we would try to facilitate a discussion between citizens, water users, customers about environmental issues, business issues, whatever it may be. So there was some, which I certainly wouldn't have thought of, so much impressed by a number of the outcomes and recommendations that were made. That was one that just
Mhm.
blew through my mind.
Some of
years
those
ago.
students are already working on campaigns here locally and up in Minnesota, and several of them are going to law school, so they have a bright future ahead of them. So thank you to the Drake University Strategic Political Communication students. And our lobbyists, Craig from Concordia, we will be meeting for our session wrap-up and then start planning our off-season advocacy, and we'll move forward planning for the 2019 session.
I have a question for you.
Yes.
First, I appreciate the acknowledgement. I've tried to do anything I can, so, but I have a question on page 2, where it talks about water quality.
Yes.
I think it may be a typographical error.
Okay.
On the very top line, it says, drinking water treatment facilities may have access to Pinnacle Assistance
Yes,
Funds.
financial. Thank you, Mark.
Now, I was wondering if that was the word you intended, because Pinnacle means finicky. It's another word for finicky. And I thought that may be appropriate, so.
Thank you for correcting me, yes.
No, I didn't mean it as a correction, it was an interesting happenstance.
Sue, if I can jump in, I have
Thank
a
you.
couple comments. One of them is Pinnacle may in fact work because we've had difficulty, I think Kyle and his staff are avoiding the Raccoon River because of its high nitrate loadings and concentrations to date that continue to be a significant problem. We are taking exclusively from the Des Moines River
What are the
at our
levels?
gallery. I haven't seen them today. I think Michael and Kyle, I know Michael was looking at them earlier. Kyle, do you have them off the top of your head?
I think they're around 10 in the Raccoon, but I don't.
Just below 10 on the Raccoon and a touch lower on the Des Moines.
But what are we looking at in Sac City? Coming towards this 13 or so, was my recollection from last week. We're seeing high numbers and we're really relying on dilution closer to home through the most recent rains as an example, but in reality, the levels that we're seeing in the Raccoon are certainly unacceptable, so we're relying entirely on the Des Moines with its own misgivings. We have to get it as raw water across the city to us here, obviously. So I want you to be aware of that. On a more technical matter, the materials you have, you'll find an emergency declaration that Ted has certified to and I have approved for about $150,000 is my recollection of expenses associated with transformation, replacement, repair, rebuild at the Maffett treatment facility. Typically, obviously, as the rest of your agenda indicates, when we have an item over $100,000, it's brought to you for approval. This was a situation in which I ultimately approved the recommendation and certification made by Ted in conference with a number of other people in the room about the emergency nature of replacing a failed transformer, a 5,000 kVA transformer, a large transformer at the Maffett treatment facility that failed on the 3rd of May. We immediately went into backup power. Backup power is about a $4,000 a day issue there and has its own unpredictability. So we've moved forward with an agreement with Eaton Corporation where we are leasing a 2,500 kVA, smaller transformation, half the size of transformation, and I've had them take and rebuild the 5,000 kVA transformer. But again, I wanted you to be familiar with the basic economics here. They're significant, but this is an issue where we believe staff is empowered to make the emergency decision and report to you, and hence the reporting that's going on here today. Happy to answer between about 5 of us in this room any question you might have on this one.
And I guess I did note in the Iowa poll this weekend, one of the things I registered today was talking about water quality being among the top issues people are concerned about.
It takes electricity to be able to make that work. So
Okay.
that's all I had.
I'll look for a motion for adjournment.
So moved.
Second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
May I ask a directional question from the board, even though you've adjourned? On July 3rd, we have two subcommittee meetings that are scheduled, I would suggest, because that is the day before a holiday.
Not gonna happen.
Not gonna happen, Mark says. Well, that's kind of what we thought. So I would suggest, with your approval, if we could reschedule those for the 17th, 2 weeks later.
Sounds good.
Excellent. Thank you. Thanks very much.
Thank you.